You're always going to meet people who will treat you with bias forever in your personal and professional life. And we can't just react to them. That's a waste of energy. If you stop at every barking dog, you're never going to reach your goal, as they say.
You're listening to Not My First Guess. I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together. Today's episode is a little bit special. We're doing our second fundraising compilation, taking different tips and hard-won lessons from our founders we've interviewed before. In this episode, we're going to focus on 5 founders: Jay Richards, Valentina Milanova, Lottie Unwin, Joy Das, and Eliot Brooks. Together, they cover a huge range of business models and industries, from B2B SaaS to HealthTech and FemTech, community plays, DeepTech and ClimateTech. We'll put a link in the show notes to listen to each founder's full episode if you want to go deeper. But this episode is designed to really drill in on fundraising and some of the common lessons we don't hear talked enough about in the startup world. Hope you enjoy. First up, we have Jay Richards. He's achieved massive growth with relatively small investment to build a huge community of Gen Z. At the time of interview, they had 25,000 community members across 111 countries, having raised just $400K. Incredible growth. And Jay talks about how some founders have a grit that means they can just go further with less.
The thing that I've seen with investors that are from low-income backgrounds or from minority backgrounds, basically from anybody that doesn't have the access to capital that middle-class white guys and middle-class white women do, is just the graft is just different. Because the truth of the matter is, when you grow up with less, or you grow up being underestimated, which is the term I use, and when you grow up being underestimated, you just have to know how to do more with less. So I remember when we raised our first angel round for Imagine, people were just like, why are you raising such a little amount? I was like, because I can do more with this little than you could do with 7 times as much, because both Kat and I come from underestimated backgrounds. So it's for us, it's just super, super easy to make that money last, just because that's what we've grown up doing. It's not like it was a shock or a horror to us, because we know how to do that. So I think the biggest thing that a lot of VCs and so on are missing is the fact that there's a quote that I love from Leila Jannar. It says that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity isn't. And I think the key is that there's so many talented people with all different demographics, but the graft that people from minority or underrepresented backgrounds have is just so much more, just from the fact that they've just had to grow up with less.
It's really interesting to hear your experience then going and raising your angel and being told you're asking for too little. That's surprising to me. Not something I've heard many angels say before. How much, can I ask, how much were you raising in your first angel?
Yeah, so so far we've raised just under 400K, but the first time it was like 50 or 60,000 pounds. And I remember just being like, what the hell are you going to do with 50K? And I was just like, don't you worry. And then it was just, we were able, because that's the thing, we've grown 3x every year since we started. And this year it's going to be like 10x or something stupid like that. When I look at it, I just know that the capital that we've raised, like, tells you the next raise we do is going to be taking this and just absolutely exploding it. We don't do the incremental jumps. We've just done massive jumps every single time. And I think that's the power of, if I'm honest.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. Yeah, and as you say, interesting, because like 50K, it keeps terrifying me every time I hear it, but 50K is like a friends and family round for a lot of people. And
there's not one person in my friends and family that could lend me 50. Mate, there's not even a person in my family that could lend me £2,000. Trying to think who would. Nobody.
Really important, and more needs to be done in the space to get that early capital into businesses who, as you say, can then explode and prove themselves, and as you say, probably do more with less because they've got that graft.
Kat came on board and then we began to build. And if I'm honest, NFL was our first client. It took me from April 2019 to April 2020 to win them. And then when we did win them, I was using Google Forms, Google Sheets. Like, our original team, we were just like pissing in the wind. We had no idea what we were doing, but we knew we were onto something. So we just had to figure it out and make it work. So we were just like, we will pay anybody that is under the age of 24 to complete these insights for us. So we were just like moving crazy. But it was like using that template. We then did the exact same methodology. So Google Forms, Google Sheets, we used that to do eBay and Gymshark. And then once we got on the other side of Gymshark, then I was like, okay, cool. We're now onto something. 3-4 clients deep. I know this is something we can really begin to build. And we just now need to build the technology around it. So then I did another raise, and that raise was actually substantially more. And that enabled us to then build the technology that we've got now. We pretty much every single week we're adding to it.
So that 50K gets you that first year runway while you're getting the clients on? And then, and I really love to hear you're basically bootstrapping it with Google Sheets and Google Docs. That works enough to get the proof points. Love that. Next, we have Eliot Brooks, who grew health tech startup Thriva to over 100,000 customers and more than 130 staff before he decided it was time for his next startup adventure. Before he left, Thriva had raised £11 million in funding based on 100% year-on-year growth rates.
Then I guess the other thing was for the next few fundraising rounds, we still really struggled. We felt like we were showing traction. We had good growth. When you get to Series A, everyone often talks about if you're a revenue generating business, you want to get to 100K MRR, monthly recurring revenue. And I think we were well above that when we then started fundraising. And we just struggled. And we'd struggled in our seed round. The angel round was a bit easier, but the seed round was a real struggle. And the Series A was just even more of a slog, to be honest, because we were still first time founders. We'd made some good progress. The market was really unknown. I think in the last 2 to 3 years in particular, we've seen so much more investment into health tech. But
Yeah.
this was now, this would have been 2018. So it was still quite new. The idea that consumers would pay for their health in the UK, which is probably one of the toughest markets in terms of we're entrenched, that healthcare is free and it's wonderful and it's great and the NHS is brilliant. We're trying to do something slightly different, but it was a real slog convincing investors. And yeah, those were probably some of the most challenging days.
It's easy to look back now and look at the numbers and assume it must have been easy. You raised big figures, but as you said, it was a slog. And the point you made about being first-time founders, that making it so much harder, this podcast, though we hope it will help serial founders just as much, is really trying to help first-time founders learn from other founders so they can shortcut their own learnings. So for you, what helped as a first-time founder get investors on board and convince them that you were the right person to lead this company along with your co-founders?
Yeah. So I think in the early rounds, you haven't got much traction to go off. I would say investors will look at team, product, market. If you're a team of first-time founders, you're missing a badge there. It's like that box isn't ticked. But are there other proof points you can throw in there through the process, through the conversations, for advisors you manage to convince on board? What are the ways that you can show you're a compelling founder of a business, even if it's your first time? So we were very lucky, actually, that I think it's 3 or 4 of our bosses invested in us. So that was one thing that it wasn't like we put it on our investor deck, but we made it clear in the seed round that yes, we haven't done this before. We've got good experience. I don't think we had amazing CVs, to be honest, but we've got good experience. But the people that have worked with us and have seen us deliver on things have backed us. You can take confidence in that.
I've not heard of anyone. I've heard of people talking to that as something that helped them before getting all bosses to buy in, but not as a kind of analog for your work ethic and your abilities. That's really interesting. Love that. Any other takeaways from you fundraising across the different rounds? Were there's some big surprises in there, or was it mainly as you expected?
Yeah, mainly as expected. I think we had a couple of like tough weeks where you go from, you build your pipeline, you have first meetings, you then get to second or third meeting with a number of investors and it's a funnel. But we had a week, like the whole funnel just disappeared. Like we got a series of no's. So you have to just brace yourself for that and not get too excited when you're on that early stage and stay focused. The other kind of big thing that we maybe didn't do in the early rounds is we didn't laser in and focus enough on specific VCs who we knew got the space. We went very broad. And my co-founder always says, you need a rifle, not a shotgun, which is a slightly crude analogy, but hopefully you get the point of you should be doing your due diligence up front to say, these investors, particularly if you're in a new space, which we were, like consumer health in the UK was not a thing. So who are the handful of investors out there who have done similar businesses, either in that space or another one where there's some analogies there, some commonalities? Yeah, that would be another big takeaway moving forward.
Yeah. And I think, again, one, founders maybe underestimate in the early stages. I often speak to angels who get frustrated with founders sending them totally generic emails with no tailoring as to why me. And it's the same for funds. They want to know that you've looked at their portfolio, understood their thesis, and that you're making an educated guess that this is really exciting to them. And again, it's sales. So you should be selling from the first not just why invest in us, but why specifically should you invest in us based on what you're interested in. And it's such I totally get it, because as you say, it's about having that funnel and you want to fill it with as much as you can. But again, it's a bit of to my mind at least, a false economy to do the spray and pray approach without doing that personalization, which is likely to increase your chance of success.
Yeah, totally agree.
Next up, we have Valentina Milanova. Valentina has raised several rounds of funding for her femtech company, Day, including a 10 million Series A. In this clip, she talks about her experiences fundraising as a female founder, as well as some of the things she did but maybe wouldn't do again. You mentioned you were funding it through personal credit cards. How much was it costing you at the beginning? What were you funding? Was that your own cost of living?
No, I had a job. I always had a full-time job, and my job was funding the cost of living. I had to fund the initial patent filings, the initial production runs, the initial clinical validation, and it all got away from me in terms of the cost. It's very expensive to start a physical products company, and there's lots of unexpected expenses, which I had no way of envisioning. But I have the advantage of, at that time, I was working in the UK, so it wasn't called settled status at the time, but I was allowed to take on credit cards in the UK, and I was allowed to take on credit cards in Bulgaria by virtue of being a Bulgarian citizen. So I could do both, take on debt in the UK and in Bulgaria. The way that I was justifying this in my head, and it's not financial advice, and I wouldn't recommend that people do that, but I was just thinking, okay, this is effectively the same cost of an MBA, and I'm learning a lot more and just enjoying it. So I wanted to continue pursuing it. And then when I eventually fundraised, I was able to pay off my debts.
And do you mind sharing how much debt you took out on credit cards before you fundraised?
It was about 40,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big, I think it's scary. I think, as you say, it kind of balloons without you knowing. Probably helpful for founders to hear. That's a lot of personal risk.
So I founded Day in 2017, and then I first fundraised in the autumn of 2018. So from the beginning of 2017 to autumn 2018, I was building everything by myself. And we didn't have any resources for like brand building, community building. And then in the autumn of 2018, we started building the brand.
You mentioned fundraising at the beginning of that journey in 2018. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like going and fundraising? How did you approach it? What were some of the lessons in the first round? And then maybe we can take the fundraising piece together and talk a little bit more about your Series A as well and your other funding.
Yeah, so fundraising has always been challenging for us, and I think will remain challenging for us going forward. I think the only reason why we were successful with the first round and the second round is that we just didn't stop pitching. Like, we didn't give up, even though there were like so many hundreds of no's. We continued pitching. I can't explain what my company does without making the room of investors around me feel uncomfortable. And it's both men and women that feel uncomfortable by the mention of the vaginal canal or menstruation tampons. I've noticed that when male investors say, "Oh, I've heard about your tampons," of course I haven't used them myself. They always feel like they have to caveat that. I'm like, no one thought you would have used them yourself. It's okay, you're safe.
That's actually really brilliant.
And people always look to the ground, and it's hard because I can't explain what the company does without making people want to leave the room out of discomfort. But again, there is a silver lining, which is that the fact that people are so uncomfortable with the subject allows me to separate the investors that wouldn't be supportive today to the investors that will be a great fit for us. And now the group of investors that we have behind us is incredible. We just had our first in-person board meeting 2 days ago. And one part of me was saying, is this real? Is our board meeting really going so smoothly? They were so supportive and understanding, and were asking the right questions and pushing us in the right ways. And I just thought, wow, this is really incredible that we managed to get a round completed in the first place, but also a round completed with people that understand the company so much and have such goodwill and genuinely want to see us succeed.
And do you think there's definitely obviously a lesson in persistence there? As you said, it was, I think I read 200 times you pitched for your first round of
Over
investment?
180, and now for the Series A we had over 400 investors that we've contacted. So I have, if anyone needs an introduction to an investor, I probably know them. I probably pitched them.
Love that. Curious, as well as the challenges of pitching what is such a taboo topic. What was your experience fundraising as a woman? And I can imagine it's in some ways difficult to disentangle when your product is very associated with women or people who menstruate. But what was your experience there raising, and particularly a young woman as well?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I'm not just a woman. I'm also in my 20s and I'm Eastern European. And I didn't go to Oxbridge or to an Ivy League college. And I didn't work for Bain or JP Morgan. So I like tick none of the boxes. And I think that makes it harder. It's just harder to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
I do get questions as to whether my dad set up the factory that manufactures the tampons or whether my brothers were really interested in machine manufacturing. It's almost like the sense of disbelief of, was it really you that did this? Was there someone behind you? Do you have a secret male co-founder, or did your dad fund things at the start? People do ask this, which I've obviously now my dad has passed, fine, particularly insensitive, but so yeah, you just get taken less seriously. I also get taken less seriously in supplier meetings and other key partner meetings. There are some advantages to that because suppliers disclose information to me that they wouldn't disclose to someone that they thought was real competition. You just get taken less seriously. And there's also a difference in the tone of the questions that you get asked if you're a female founder versus a male founder. I feel a lot of the questions that we get asked and a lot of the due diligence that we have to do in order to justify the fundraising rounds, it always puts us in defensive mode. We're always on the defense, on the back foot, because we have to explain why every negative eventuality will not happen. We have to explain how we've thought about every single potential risk and we've mitigated for it. And we have less time. We're allowed less frequently to imagine and to describe what things would look like if everything went according to plan. And I think that's another key difference. As part of our due diligence process for this fundraising round, we had just received a letter from a regulator confirming our regulatory status and confirming that what we have been doing until now is correct. And one of the law firms that was working on the round asked us to justify that the regulator wouldn't reverse the letter that they had just sent us. The argument that this lawyer was making was that this regulator would change their mind and reverse the position. That's such an unlikely eventuality. It was actually incredibly difficult for us to, because we had to get additional scientific opinions explaining why this wouldn't happen. And it's such a hard thing even to explain to a scientist. This lawyer believes that this letter might be reversed. And then everyone's like, what? Yeah.
And it's so galling because it doesn't just have an impact on the actual investor meeting, but it also means you're wasting your time. There's so many ways it costs female founders. And another of our founders on the show a few episodes back, Amber Probin, who founded Peakle, which is the first female urinal, said the exact same thing. They just got asked so many questions about the risks in the business. And there's so many studies on this. So if you're listening and thinking this sounds unbelievable, I hate to say most female founders who've raised, that is the experience I've heard from them. So it is shocking in that it is actually grim and genuinely hamstrings female founders, not just because it's harder to find investors to take you seriously, because it wastes time in the process. It's taking you away from time you could be spent getting traction. It's taking you away from time spent finding more investors.
It's just super time consuming.
It's maddening. And as you say, you then can't raise as much because your valuation is tied to questions of the limitations, not tied to the big vision, which you're given less time to paint. So you're actually capping the thinking of the investors of how big the business could get. So it just compounds on so many fronts. Another element I wanted to ask about, particularly around your Series A round, is that you held back from doing an external raise in March 2020 for very obvious reasons, but you have just done it now, which is arguably no less difficult in terms of time to fundraise. So do you have any lessons for founders on what it is like fundraising in this environment, and maybe ways to mitigate as much as you can, acknowledging you can't change how investors think?
So I found it harder this time around to fundraise than in March 2020. I think it's worse. COVID kind of threw things off for 3 months. And then fundraising was back to normal. And in fact, if you look statistics, it increased. Not for female founders, it decreased. But the volume of venture capital in total that was distributed during COVID went up compared to previous years. Whereas now I find that people are really closing shop for the foreseeable. People are really waiting things out, trying to see when the recession will happen, if we're already in a recession. Also, a lot of companies are really struggling growth wise because of the difficult economic circumstances. So, iOS changes already completely destroyed a lot of companies' abilities to adequately and affordably find customers for their products and services. And now the cost of living crisis is forcing everyone to reevaluate their entire spend. And I know a lot of companies are just genuinely struggling. You saw Mate.com went bankrupt. Meta, arguably one of the most profitable companies in the world, is laying people off. So yeah, my advice for people that are fundraising in this climate is if you can do anything to not fundraise in this climate, it would be great. Bootstrap, venture debt. There's also services that allow you to fund your marketing spend. Just anything that's not venture capital right now, because you're going to spend a lot of time trying to convince people to give you money, because it's a horrible time to be fundraising in right now. You might not be successful. So it might be energy that's not well spent. And if you do get fundraising, you'll probably get it at poor terms.
Mm.
So I don't have any unique advice on what to do at present, apart from the standard advice for fundraising, which is make sure you keep a really tidy data room, make sure you're really quick with your follow-ups, reach out to as many firms as possible in order to build your momentum.
That's still really helpful advice, and I think definitely worth listening to if you possibly can. Next, we're going to dive in with Joyita Das, a serial founder who created 5 startups and successfully exited 3. Since the episode aired, she's fundraised again for her most recent venture, Samudra Oceans. Let's talk next about fundraising. So I guess let's start more broadly. You are a woman of colour who has fundraised, which is insanely stupid rarity, to put it non-expletively. And candidly, like reflecting maybe as well on the systems, because I know I don't just work with someone who's raised, but I know you're personally trying to drive systemic change in how VCs approach their own unconscious biases and how the system is currently broken in terms of funding underrepresented founders. So maybe, I guess, reflections on 2 fronts. One is, what do you see that's broken? 2 is, what do you see that individual founders can do where they do have agency? And I guess 3 is, what should we all be doing as an ecosystem differently?
So where it's broken is, first of all, the whole perception of the system. We have given the system a lot of undue power because of how we perceive it. And it also obviously has gone to their head, as all power does. I think that there's this perception VC funding is the only way to rapid growth, but that is not true at all. You can bootstrap, you can get corporate partial buyouts, you can do friends and family, you can crowdfund, you can grant, you can do even rapid growth. There are like some ways of structured financing in certain businesses where you can. And yeah, there are some businesses that are very well suited to the VC instrument. The instrument was invented for a reason. But not every single thing should be or ought to be VC funded, as the nature of the business is. And the second thing that is about VC funding that people should know, I think that rapid growth is also a choice of how the founders want to execute the business, right? Because in the beginning, they are the majority shareholders. Maybe you want something else in your life or from the systemic change you're driving. We've turned building businesses into like everyone has to make a B2B SaaS. Everyone has to raise pre-seed, seed, series A, series B. It's become like a formula. And like, as long as you don't like the job that you do, go make a B2B SaaS startup and get VC fund. It's just the completely wrong way to look at the economy. You make a business because you have something that can have some people who have buyers. And for some reason, you think that's what you want to spend the rest of your life doing, or a long chunk of it. And when you do that, you recognize, okay, I need some help doing it. What's the help I need? Maybe the help I need is a grant. Maybe the help I need is VC. There's an organic way to approach it first principles, which is not what's happening. And that has given this sector a lot of undue power. They think they're end all and be all, and we treat them as such. So we need to balance that a little bit. Also, I've been on the other side. I've also been part of VC funds. Not everyone is the same, as people say. There's some really good ones and empathetic VCs as well. But in general, I do find them quite disconnected from the reality, particularly if the fund doesn't have much operators who come from the background of being an operator. I think treating an early scale and trying to optimize the downside is a bit ridiculous because it's just the wrong instrument for that. And it particularly bites pretty badly for female founders because we, by nature, already just to be in the room, we've had to go through a lot and a lot of rejection. And that beating shows up in your self confidence. And then if you're further pushed to explain the reason for your existence, you go like, I can't do this. And that shows in further conversation and it spirals into a really bad process for both sides. It's very important for us to recognize that you don't necessarily always need VC funding. And if you do, find the ones that you really would like to work with. I like to think of them as extended team members, right? They're going to be on your board or your cap table. They're going to be in your team. So the same way you recruit a team member, can you work with this person long term? Do you like this organization? Don't just do it to get capital. So that's really important because there are certain people that I would love to work with. But of course, there are some I just don't want them on my team. They may be great people. I don't want them on my team. So again, do you want the capital? So that's really important. Lots of people will be like, just take the money. Who cares who's giving it? And I'm like, this is not that kind of money. This is the kind of money where you have to care who it comes from. I think there are some amazing angels in the UK ecosystem that are great. The other reason I would say it's a little bit broken, I think, is because the UK VC ecosystem or Europe in general is a bit younger compared to US where it first started. So the risk-taking appetite is quite low because a lot of people are coming with the same mindset as they did when they were working in PE or banking, and they've just transposed that mindset directly to VC. It's not the same thing. And I think that is a bit broken. I think there needs to be more operators and more ability to take deeper risks. And you can't simulate an ecosystem where you expect everyone with deep tech to just leave at Series A and go to US for funding. That just can't be a thing. So it's fundamentally broken. The other thing about female funding or, well, minorities not getting enough funding, I simply think it's a question of representation. We feel is similar to us. Unconsciously, human brain likes that. That's just us, right? That's just us. That's just how human beings are designed. We have a lot of biomimicry going on, and it's like thousands of millions of years of evolution that has brought us to this point where we subconsciously just get attached to things that are like us. And that's how we form groups and herds. Well, the same tendency operates in VC. If we don't have a lot of representation, then women who will go up to you never feel at home. They're always surrounded by people who look and behave nothing like them. If it's like completely opposite people always sitting in that room. So that really impacts us subconsciously. The lots of women that I speak to that are thinking of fundraising, even looking and going to a VC's page, their confidence level just immediately drops. I bet if you put various electrodes in all their brains and graph it, it has a direct connection to the pictures they see. They don't see anyone like them. And even though they may not do it consciously, they immediately don't feel confident enough to go up and speak to them. So I guess representation, having more women and more women of color in VC would be a big deal. For me, how I cracked it, God knows. The first million I raised ever was the hardest. Okay, it's in my TED Talk, 180 meetings for the first million. 180 meetings. And these are 180 official meetings, not counting the unofficial coffees and the follow-ups. Can you imagine if you do that in 2 years, which has 720 days, how many days I've had actual physical meetings literally every day for 2 years? That's a rejection a day. So it was hard. But then the next million was ridiculously easy. The next 5 million was far easier. And then the last 10, 20 million I've raised for others or for myself have been really fast. I think the thing that happens is you begin to know various people in the ecosystem that you want to work with. And you can look at it as a closed circle, or some people will call it nepotism. I don't know. But now I only go to the ones that I know and trust and people that they recommend. And I don't go to anyone else. And because we have known each other a long time, it's a bit easier. Same with recommendations. I go with those that I've already worked with. And so I can trust them. It's a bit easier. So as you become a repeat founder, it helps. Even if you failed, and I have failed quite gloriously, but even when you fail, you retain that level of trust and control over the circle. If you treated people ethically, they treat you ethically, and you can go back to them and still continue the conversations for other things. A couple of my investors have been repeat investors for me, even when one of the last ventures they did with me was a failure. Like they lost money. And still in the next one, they came to me and they said, you know what? I see all the variables that led to your failure, and I would help you this time and love to help you avoid those. And can we do this again? And it was awesome.
And I think that is so powerful because you are going to be exposed to so much rejection, and there's nothing I can do or you can say that will make it less brutal.
I give you a little quick playbook. It's not uniform to everybody, but just try. You can have a list of angels, funds, and angel syndicates that you would like, and then color code the top 10 that you would absolutely love for whatever reasons. This is just like college applications. Don't say just because you're Harvard, you're going to go. It actually doesn't make sense. If you want to do architecture, probably better off going to somewhere else. So just don't say things like, you're the top VC, so I want to know. Do they have something you really need? Think about it. Maybe they're not the best for you, even though they're a good brand. So I like to really look at them holistically. What's their portfolio? What's their check size? What value they bring? What are their contacts? And then you will find there are some that you would absolutely love to have, some that are okay, and some that are friendly. And then once you do that, the first thing is like even a year ahead of race, reach out to them and ask what sort of things do you look for in people and in businesses like mine? What feedback do you have? Like in what directions can I move that's attractive to you? And again, don't take that advice at face value. Build what you need to, but hear from them. Also put yourself in their radar. Be top of their mind. And then put them on your newsletter. If you had a great chat, if they think you could be in their deal flow, they would like to know. And then you give them updates for a year. A year is a long relationship. They've seen you grow, your business grow. When it's time for fundraising, they're willing to have a chat. Maybe they'll come to you on your own. If in the 10th newsletter in the 10th month you go, now I'm fundraising, they'll be like, yeah, let's have a chat. You may not even have to ask for it. So have time, nurture relationships. It's same like big enterprise sales, the exact same formula. The second thing I would say is, of course, people are going to treat you with bias. They're human beings. They're going to treat women founders with bias, particularly women of color and or anybody of color or whatever. Or if honestly, various things. I don't want to even go into it, but like lots of things impact what they think about you, the physical appearance of you. Well, I think a great quality for a founder, and I would say this carries into your leadership as well, is moving from reaction to response. You can react, but it's not going to help you. It's not going to help them. It doesn't help the greater ecosystem. It just burns bridges. I like to be very honest and authentic and outgoing and fiery, but those are very chosen responses, by the way. I choose to respond that way. So I think reaction will completely kill the efficacy of what you're trying to deliver. So if you find someone treating you with a bias, step back, take a deep breath, think what following question can you ask them that can expose it without you going, just say that because I'm a female. Who's going to say, yes, I did? No one will. All you've done is you've now blocked off this person from even giving you authentic feedback. So I think stepping back and going like, asking a nice follow-up question, which was like, can I ask if you've seen similar businesses that have worked? Who are they? So I can reach out to them for advice. So you kind of point out, like, is there any reason you think the market will not accept ABC? Because I saw XYZ really work well. So you show you've done market research and what authenticity they have. So people have to give you actual subjective response of what they said. But you can't do this conversation if you're angry or very upset. You're always going to meet people who will treat you with bias forever in your personal and professional life. And we can't just react to them. That's a waste of energy. If you stop at every barking dog, you're never going to reach your goal, as they say. Also, a human way to look at it for women founders, I'd say, is sometimes people are not malicious. They just have lack of exposure. I was recently with a bunch of farmers in a very remote part of UK. I don't want to name because I just don't want people to stereotype again. And this gentleman made like a comment which in any other circumstance would be considered highly racist. But I know that he wasn't. He was very nice to me. And he had grown up in that village forever. And he just didn't know any other way to express what he wanted to say. And like, I can be really mad with him. And he was 84 living alone in his house. He's a farmer. And it was said in the best of interest. He really liked me. And then he had to say something. And then he said, is it whatever? And I was like, you can't say that. That's racist. It's not allowed in the woke world. But honestly, about 10 years ago, if he had said that, I'd have been angry. I would have reacted. So I think moving from reaction to response is important. Not everyone is malicious. See how you can handle it. And the last thing I'd say is I don't think as founders we have that much agency, because end of the day, how can the victim have the agency? The system has the agency. The onus is on the system to change. The victim can go so far, but they can't really change what is done to them. But if you want to drive change, then do something. But after stepping back, because those 3 seconds or 5 seconds give you the intelligence to now attack this problem in a way that this person can't escape the outcome. But otherwise, you're just like losing steam. That's all it is.
Finally, we have Lottie Unwin, proud bootstrapper who grew her business to over $1 million in revenue without fundraising. In this episode, she shares her perspective on why she chose a different path. Were you ever tempted to take funding? Was that like a conscious decision, unconscious?
Hell no. So I haven't really bootstrapped because I haven't really ever had to spend that much. The typical way you think about bootstrapping is that like you drum up the first load of cash, but that's never been needed because, and this does come back to actually my lack of investment in brand. To start with, it was just a MailChimp newsletter that I was writing every week. And then it was some email templates. Our recruitment business was built off some email templates and some Google Docs. There's never been a moment of outlay. And now, of course, there are, but they're so proportionate to the size of the business. It's never felt particularly hair-raising. Have I been tempted to raise money? I have such deep respect for anyone who does it. I think it looks miserable and hard. I have a perverse itch to scratch. I've got this like millennial founder bone and like feeling that I need to do it because I want to feel like I've done it.
Yeah.
But in my eyes, that would be like a different thing. Like CopyTub in and of itself is a unique internal culture. And that is because we are not accountable to anyone other than each other. And we can make decisions in a truly democratic way. I can really empower my leadership team and say, as a group, we're going to decide how we think this business should be run and what this business needs to deliver for us. I can build careers for people in my team that are genuinely about what they want and actually create an environment where, hand on heart, I really hope and believe that they might want to stay for 10 years because they can feel part of something for 10 years and they might stay not like dragging it out because they're waiting for an exit event, but that they might actually just want to be part of this thing. And I can make those decisions about how we do that and how much like empowerment I want to give to them. So I feel incredibly protective over the culture and the level of control and influence that I can therefore share with a group of people, that I think the idea of like diluting that feels a bit icky.
I think there's so much in there that's worth unpacking. One is you talked about the like millennial itch, and I do think it's definitely been like, I don't know if it's because we've grown up like the Zuckerbergs and feeling like it's so plausible for someone our age to do it. I don't know what it is, mass press around it, but there is, and I encounter it so much with founders, there's ego attached of that feels impressive. I want to be on TechCrunch as having fundraised. That would be an incredible milestone, but not a great reason to fundraise. And to your point, actually looking at your business model and asking, do we need to fundraise for this business model? And what do I want to grow? Because it does take longer to build something without that capital, but you do protect the control and you protect, to your point, your ability to set the culture that's not growth at all costs. We need to exit in 5 to 7 years, which is what you would be if you're venture backed, because the VCs need an exit event. What have been some of the challenges of taking your approach though, as well? Because presumably there are some.
So the biggest challenge is the fear of what could have been. So I will never know what would have happened if I had spent aggressively. And I have to be really comfortable with that. I don't know that my mental health can hack it. That's why I am really comfortable with it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I think there's so much risk that I'd be a puddle. I'm very financially cautious, which I think is also important context here. So I have not run this business hand to mouth. Very early on with lockdown, all of our revenue dried up overnight. And this was like 30 grand a year revenue. This was not proper. It was at the time it was proper. And I didn't know how I was going to pay myself and pay Hope. And I looked at my personal bank balance. I was like, I think I can do 6. I think I can keep us going for 6 months or maybe a bit longer. And I was like, well, that's what I'll do. And I hated that moment so deeply. Like doing that spreadsheet was I just committed to myself that I would never be in that position again. That's not worth it. And sure, we could be growing faster. We could be growing faster, but we just be wasting loads of cash. I think we should be growing irresponsibly. And because I don't have a deadline and I'm really enjoying the journey, I'm really comfortable with the pace. And I think I have quite a strong view of life that it's really important to have a good time along the way. And that I just think it's really sad when people waste their lives waiting for a thing that never happens.
Yeah. On the VC front, it's a mixed bag of some people love it and thrive under that pressure and that growth culture. And that is utterly their zone. Some people just have to go through it and it's a great life lesson. But equally, I think what I want to steer people away from doing is making it this perfect state, right? If I raise venture capital, then my life will be great, then my business will be successful, then I'm a success. And actually, most venture-backed businesses fail. The founders are exposing yourself to a different kind of stress and different kind of accountability. You're not your own boss to the same extent. You have investors who you are beholden to and shareholders who you have legal responsibilities and a ton of emotional responsibility as well. And I do think it's just really helpful to do the kind of reflection that you're doing, Lottie, which is to say, actually, what do I want to be building and why? And actually, if I want to build this for a particular lifestyle, and if you've listened to any of our other episodes, I know I'm banging the same drum, but I just want to keep banging it because I think it's important. Like lifestyle business, I think is talked about almost derogatorily sometimes in the startup space. And I'm interested if this is something you've encountered, maybe not because it is still growing to an incredibly impressive scale, but I think sometimes there's a snobbery around, oh, you're just building a lifestyle business.
I'm not building a lifestyle business. My partner says to me, if you're building a lifestyle business, you're doing a terrible job because you have a terrible lifestyle. Interestingly, I do have an ambition to transition what I'm doing to a lifestyle business.
Got it.
So I can't work this hard forever because there's no space in my life for much else. But right now I'm up for it. But I'm beginning to think about, okay, over the next few years, how do I move the team to a place where I do feel like I have a good lifestyle and a good business? And if we're going to stick those two words together, that's fine. But I think that what's underpinning all of this is just about getting really clear on what success actually looks like and what the right metrics for it are. Interesting that you talk about one thing around how much I've raised and that getting in TechCrunch and that being like a bit of kudos. The one I get is around how many people you employ when everyone's like, whoa. And I'm like, no, it means I've got really low margins. It means that my business is really hard work because I'm employing a lot of people to generate not a lot of cash. And I love it, but that's not pat on the back. I can't remember the stat, but like Craigslist that does like $80 billion or whatever and has a team of 12. That to me is the coolest thing ever.
But you're so right. And I was chatting to a friend who founded a successful kind of beauty subscription box years ago and was running in a lot of these circles with the super successful at the time founders. And like she said, every time she'd go to another event, the question was always like, okay, so what's the team size now? We've attached so much to that question that it's just not helpful.
It's really misleading. And it fosters really stupid behavior.
Yeah.
Because you start hiring fueled by this need to hire, and then you have to make loads of people redundant.
And then often you make those redundancies and you're like, oh, actually, we're just as effective.
Yeah. So I just think we need to be way more careful by what we celebrate and really do the thinking on what are the metrics that I want to be held against.
The two questions I always say to founders is like, when you're thinking about funding, there's lots of questions, but the two first ones are like, one is what do you genuinely personally want? And when I say want, I don't mean the pride that's going to come from an award or an article. What is like going to last and make you feel great at your deathbed that you did? And the second thing is actually, what does your business model require? Because sometimes those things actually don't work together and you need to change the business model. If for you're desperate to be a venture-backed business, some businesses can't support that. And if you're desperate to build a business that you get to keep owning and keep controlling, some businesses to get a big enough market share to be exciting for you personally, they do need that injection of capital and it's not going to survive without it. So I think so important to have those conversations, to your point, without the judgment attached. That's a wrap for this episode. We hope you really enjoyed it. We'd love to hear what other topics you'd love us to deep dive in on. And I promise you, we have incredible new original episodes coming very soon. Watch this space. In the meantime, if you want to do us a favor and help us grow, which helps us produce more and more episodes, then you can give us some love. Share it with a friend in WhatsApp, shout about us on LinkedIn or your other social media. Building a podcast is incredible fun. I get to interview founders, the likes of which you've heard today, who inspire me so much, and I'm constantly learning from them. But it's also hard to grow. One of the main ways we do it is with your kind words. Whether that's shouting about us on LinkedIn or social media, or sharing us directly with friends and founders you think could use the lessons. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd ask you to maybe consider taking a minute and just writing a quick post or a quick share of us. I cannot tell you how much it means, and the more founders we can reach, hopefully the more mistakes we can avoid. Thanks so much for listening. We look forward to sharing more with you soon. One of the most annoying things that can happen to any of us is getting cold outreach that feels like the company hasn't done any research on you at all. So it's no surprise that investors like outreach from founders that feels like they've actually researched them. That's why I was so excited when the founder of ShipShape.vc, Daniel, reached out to me about sponsoring this episode. ShipShape.vc is a search engine that's free for founders to use to find investors who've been sharing content that shows they're interested in startups like you. I've already been talking about ShipShape.vc on panels I've been on and to founders I coach, because I genuinely think it could be a massive game changer for startups. There's a link in the show notes to learn more if you're interested.